21. Redlichia relinquished the authority of the King of Wisdom. He sat in the palace, cradling the crown, his clouded eyes gleaming with joy as if admiring the most beautiful masterpiece of his own creation. He closed his eyes, and the mythical power within the crown stirred to life. Tiny flames seemed to dance upon the black, bony crown, etching their marks into its surface. Hiss! The patterns on the crown were too intricate for the naked eye to discern, but anyone possessing the power of wisdom who held this crown would be able to see the words inscribed upon it. God said, "I am alone, and you are also alone. Humanity has not yet been born into this world, and there is only you, a single trilobite man." Out of loneliness, God created Redlichia, the King of Wisdom. And because of Redlichia's loneliness, God created the trilobite men. Thus, the race began, and the kingdom was established from this moment on. Quote. God said, "I am the God who created you. And you are their king." Redlichia recorded on the crown the words God had spoken to him. This was the dialogue between him and God, the guidance of destiny itself. All the words gathered together formed the covenant between the trilobite men and the divine. Once this was completed, as long as he imprinted his will as the progenitor of the bloodline into the bloodline before his death, this perfect masterpiece of his would be finished. It was not merely a supreme treasure but also Redlichia's final answer to his life. Redlichia grew more and more excited, his spirit completely pouring into this treasure. God said to me, "The chasm of desire will not be satisfied simply because you give enough, and the mountain of resentment will not disappear merely because you bestow blessings." As he engraved this sentence, a rumbling sound emanated from beneath the earth, and the entire God-given city trembled with the intense vibrations. Rumble. Redlichia finally ceased his work and glanced outside. He stepped out of the palace, puzzled by the unusual tremors. What is that sound? Could it be a nearby volcanic eruption? The trilobite men toiling in the God-given city paused their labors and scanned their surroundings, their gazes filled with uncertainty and fear. Then, they witnessed a sight more terrifying than anything in their memories. The magnificent and towering Wisdom Palace collapsed in an instant, reduced to a pile of rubble. Woo! Amidst the billowing dust, a giant insect over 20 meters tall burst forth from the earth, tearing through the ground and buildings as it roared furiously at the sky. The fusion monster drilled out from underground, its snail-like eyes rolling about until they settled on Redlichia, the King of Wisdom, who had just emerged from the palace ruins. It targeted Redlichia directly, launching an attack without hesitation. Redlichia's expression was one of shock and disbelief. The proverb God had given him earlier descended just as he engraved this sentence. As if it were destiny itself. Dozens of guards emerged from the corridors on both sides, rushing towards the Wisdom Palace. Injured survivors crawled out of the ruins, charging towards the terrifying figure of the fusion monster. Protect the king! Protect the King of Wisdom! It was evident that this was the first time the God-given city had faced an attack and the first time the King of Wisdom had encountered an assassination attempt. The guards inside and outside the palace were in a state of panic, like headless flies, unable to rescue the king, who was already in grave danger. Redlichia recognized the fusion monster instantly and shouted the name of its master. Is it Boone? This was the name of the second prince, which meant, to repay kindness. But it was clear that at this moment, the giant burrowing worm under the second prince's command was not here to repay kindness but to kill him. Boone, I command you as the King of Wisdom, stop it immediately. This voice echoed in the minds of all trilobite men, even those in another city on the other side of the vast ocean. But Boone was obviously not the mastermind behind this attack. His very existence had already vanished from this world, and Redlichia's order to him had no effect. It's not Boone. Then who is it? A name surfaced in Redlichia's mind, and he recalled the proverb of God he had just engraved. But it was too late. Everything happened in a flash. The lightning strike launched by the hidden ambitioner left him no chance to utter another word. The fusion monster's giant maw had already descended upon Redlichia, its terrifying mandibles poised to crush the King of Wisdom's head. A black shadow engulfed Redlichia, threatening to extinguish the epic tale of the King of Wisdom's life. Is he dead? On the other side of the sea, Ents gazed at the commotion in the God-given city from afar, while also hearing the words shouted by the King of Wisdom when he invoked his authority. Boone, I command you as the King of Wisdom, stop it immediately. Listening to the familiar words and tone, the voice was still majestic but quite hurried. It was clear that Redlichia had encountered a dire situation, with no time to compose himself. Ents, of course, knew what his father was facing. Tears suddenly flowed from his eyes. His father, the great king of wisdom, was truly about to perish. He admired him because he was the king of wisdom who created and opened up civilization, the possessor of the power of wisdom. He was great, benevolent, and wise. In Ence's eyes, he was an insurmountable mountain. But he was also biased. Even though Ence was his eldest son, why couldn't he give the throne to his own firstborn when God had given everything to his youngest son? Ence held his face and knelt on the ground. While tears streamed from his eyes, he kept shouting. It wasn't me. It was Boone who killed father. It was Boone, that ambitious wretch. He wanted to seize the authority of the king of wisdom, so he killed father. I am the king of wisdom chosen by father. I should have been the heir to the throne. When everything was inevitably hurtling towards the worst possible outcome, God stepped out of the temple. He stood before the temple, gazing down at the farce unfolding below. Beneath the vast sky, atop the Grand Pyramid, he raised his hand. Stop. With a single word, everything truly came to a halt. All within sight froze in place, and the flow of time throughout the entire world stopped at Yin Shen's will. To outsiders, this power was unimaginable, but to Yin Shen, it was not so remarkable. He could not alter the flow of time in the entire universe, but as long as he abandoned synchronicity with the universe's time, the years would pause from his perspective. He could not change the universe, but he could change himself. He was a wandering soul beyond and outside the universe, an observer unbound by time. With a wave of his hand, the terrifying burrowing worm-like monster instantly perished, reverting to a mere insect egg. Red Lucia, who had been on the brink of death, was immediately freed from his perilous predicament, though he remained unaware due to the freezing of time. Yin Shen then turned his gaze towards the direction where Ence was located. 22. Ence felt a moment of disorientation, and he found himself no longer in his original location but kneeling at the base of the seemingly endless staircase leading up to the pyramid's peak. The god's temple. Ence was so frightened that he tumbled backward, sitting on the ground with a look of terror on his face. What is this? How did I get here? How am I here? He quickly lowered his head, not daring to let his eyes gaze upon the top of the stairs. He feared that his gaze would disturb the existence at the highest point. Ence was not only terrified of this sudden change but also feared the temple atop the Golden Pyramid, the mysterious and lofty existence residing among the divine, unfathomable and inscrutable. I must go. I have to leave now. I must get away from here. Trembling all over, he wanted to crawl downward, but at that moment, a beam of light illuminated the staircase. The light slowly extended downward from above, like mercury spilling onto the ground. The color was a dazzling white. It was not the light of the sun but a pure and sacred light, as if a power emanating from the depths of the soul. All expression vanished from Ence's face, and he turned his head. The light suffused his eyes, turning the whites and pupils a pure white as well. Raising his head, he saw a silhouette within the light. An existence transcending time and years, eternal and unaffected by any constraints or influences. In that instant, Ence understood the true nature of the being before him. Ence's shoulders slumped, his hands hanging limply at his sides like noodles. His entire body seemed to lose all strength as he knelt on the ground, only his head raised high to gaze upon the star-like shadow above. God Yinsai. It was the first time he had seen God, and it would be the last. God was not an immovable stone, completely different from what he had seen when his father took him into the temple in his youth. He did not emerge from the temple, not because the temple confined him. Rather, this universe rejected him, and it made no difference wherever he was. So this is the true face of God. Ence raised his hands toward God as if embracing the light. Oh, God, will you mete out my punishment? The divine voice seemed to emanate from above the clouds, high atop the palace. Son who committed patricide, your life and death shall be decided by your father, and your sins shall be defined by him. Yin Shen merely glanced at Ence before withdrawing his gaze and returning to the temple. As the light receded from the top of the staircase, Ence collapsed completely to the ground. Ence had just crawled down from the pyramid steps like a pile of mud when a group of strong and tall trilobite man guards surrounded him. Take him. Several trilobite man guards seized Ence and dragged him onto the main road. Ence did not resist and, while being dragged away, glanced at the enormous statue of the King of Wisdom erected at the base of the pyramid, a tribute from Yesile to his father, the King of Wisdom. The citizens of the Yinsai Kingdom stood on both sides of the main road in the God-given city, watching in disbelief as Crown Prince Ence was escorted away. Is that Prince Ence? How could it be Prince Ence? Impossible, he is the son of the King of Wisdom. What is this all about? Amidst the uncomprehending and shocked gazes of the crowd, Ence was dragged before Red Lucia and forced to kneel on a pile of rubble. The once grand and magnificent palace had been reduced to a heap of stones, with the bodies of trilobite men buried beneath. Atop the ruins, Red Lucia stared intently at Ence, his eyes filled with incomprehension, anger, and sorrow. How dare you do such a thing? Killing your own father, and offending the divine. As a priest of God, you actually used the power bestowed upon you by God to murder your king. Without waiting for Ence to answer, Red Lucia held up an insect egg, hard as stone, and questioned him. Tell me, how did your brother Boone's fusion monster end up in your hands? Where has Boone gone? Ence did not conceal anything, and his eyes showed no trace of remorse, as if he were utterly indifferent. What do you think, great king of wisdom? With your wisdom, it shouldn't be hard to guess what I did, right? Ence's words completely ignited Red Lucia's fury. But I want to hear you say it. He roared, his voice filled with rage and anguish. Ence turned his head to the side, his words defiant, yet he still did not dare to meet his father's eyes. I killed Boone and then dug out the bone from his brow. I ate it, and naturally, I could control his fusion monster. As for his corpse, it's in the sea. Upon hearing this, Red Lucia's entire body trembled. You wicked son, you are courting death. At this moment, the queen rushed out from behind and grabbed her husband. Don't kill him. Red Lucia looked at his queen, his eyes filled with rage. He killed his brother. He killed Boone. He even wanted to kill me, his father. Boone was also your son. Why can't I kill him? Shouldn't he pay the price for what he has done? The queen pleaded with Red Lucia, just because we lost one son, let's not lose a second one. The queen lay on the ground, holding Red Lucia tightly. Please, my love, she implored, her voice breaking with emotion, I beg you, do not kill our son with your own hands. That would be the most tragic thing in the world. Please don't let that happen. Banish him far away, and never let him return. The queen looked at her eldest son, quickly beg your father for forgiveness. However, Ence laughed loudly and, kneeling on the ground, said with a look of disdain. I have done nothing wrong. I am your eldest son. I am the next king of wisdom. How could I possibly accept not being king? How could I tolerate someone else sitting on the throne? Even if you don't kill me today, I will kill Yesiel in the future. He looked at his father and said clearly, if I cannot become king, then I choose death. It was evident that Ence was no longer prepared to live. After listening, if Red Lucia had been angry before, now his eyes held only coldness. He stepped down from the collapsed palace, one step at a time, saying to Ence as he walked. Ence, if someone must kill you, it can only be me, your father. And not your brother. The sharp end of the scepter pierced Ence's chest, and blood flowed continuously down the patterns on the scepter. Red Lucia personally killed Ence. In the pool of blood, Ence heard his mother's heart-wrenching cries, but his gaze remained fixed on Red Lucia. It was unclear whether he was looking at his father or the crown atop his head. Ence's vision faded to black as his life slipped away, and he knew no more. 23. A struggle for the throne, a father and son at each other's throats. It was unclear when it all began. Perhaps it started from the moment when Ence, as a child, was joyfully led by his father Red Lucia to the temple of God, only to see his father gazing at him with immense disappointment. Or perhaps the fate of fratricidal bloodshed had already been sealed when Yesiel awakened his innate talents. But at this point, there was no need to dwell on it anymore. The curtain had finally fallen on this farce. Thud! Red Lucia withdrew his scepter and threw it to the ground, the bony staff making a muffled sound. For a moment, he swayed, and the guards beside him immediately rushed to his side in panic. King of wisdom, he had to firmly grasp the guards beside him to prevent himself from falling. After taking a few breaths, he regained his strength and waved his hand, ordering them to take away Ence's corpse. Turning around, he looked at the queen sitting on the ground, her mouth open but unable to make a sound of crying. Red Lucia's eyes were filled with remorse. Forcing a mother to witness her child's death before her very eyes was simply too cruel, and the one who killed her child was her husband, the child's biological father. I'm sorry. I'm truly, so sorry. Red Lucia kept apologizing, even though he was not much better off than her. He picked up the queen and left the ruins. He walked with some difficulty, but his hands held her tightly with all his might. He even stooped, which would have been considered a loss of kingly demeanor for the usual Red Lucia, but at this moment, he no longer cared. Let's go. Let's return. All the trilobite men inside and outside knelt on the ground. Everyone could feel Red Lucia's sorrow, even though there was no expression on his face, nor did he show any sign of weakness. The queen began to refuse all food and could not even drink water. She started to fall into a coma and lose consciousness. "Ents, where have you gone? Why haven't you come home yet? Did you run off to play in the sea again? I told you not to go. Boone, you're misbehaving with your older brother again. I won't let you off today." In her dreams, she kept calling out the words she had said to her children when they were young, her expectations for them when they were born, and her admonishments when they were mischievous as they grew up. Back then, she was still young, with her children gathered around her, innocent and adorable. Red Lucia stayed by her side the entire time, listening to her words and holding her hand. Until a few days later, the queen suddenly woke up, her consciousness regaining clarity. This was the final flicker of life before death. Red Lucia also understood that she had reached the final moments of her life. Red Lucia's face instantly turned extremely unsightly, as if he was about to shed tears, but when the queen opened her eyes and looked at him, he forced a smile while holding back his emotions. "You're awake." The queen also sensed that her days were numbered. Her mind was exceptionally clear. She looked at Red Lucia and then at his hand holding hers. "There's no need to apologize. I don't blame you. I just can't accept. Why did Ents turn out this way? How did everything come to this?" The queen's voice grew fainter as she spoke. "When Yesiel returns, pass the throne to him. You're tired too. It's time to rest." Red Lucia nodded, his voice choked with emotion. All right. The queen's pupils flickered with a faint light, but one could see the light gradually extinguishing. Her bright eyes slowly turned to a stone-like gray. Red Lucia watched as the queen lying on the stone bed gradually stiffened, turning into a stone statue from the inside out. The queen was dead. This dealt another huge blow to Red Lucia. Having just lost 2 sons, he now lost his most beloved person. At this moment, urgent shouts came from outside, and someone rushed in with great urgency, accompanied by the sound of noisy arguments as the guards blocked those trying to enter. "Great King of Wisdom, are you all right? How could Ents do such a thing? How could he kill Boone and betray his father? How did this happen? Has Ents gone mad?" Some were sincere, while others took the opportunity to probe. The remaining 2 sons and 2 daughters had finally returned, and with them came their children and even grandchildren. Without turning around, Red Lucia uttered a single command. "Let them in." The entire family poured in, only to see the deceased queen. The noisy voices instantly fell silent. After a long while, someone finally spoke. "Mother Queen." Red Lucia's eyes were filled with the color of dusk as he said to his children. "You've all come back. Take one last look at your mother. Bid her farewell properly." He himself slowly walked out of the room, bypassing the collapsed Wisdom Palace and entering a secret chamber behind it, with the walls carved with murals. The stone door of the chamber closed, and he sat alone in the darkness. Red Lucia once again removed his crown of wisdom and began engraving the covenant on the crown, continuing from the sentence he had not finished carving. But at this moment, his state of mind was completely different. When he engraved the previous words, he was proud and pleased. But now, he felt desolation. His life was not as perfect as he had boasted, and he was not as great as he thought. He had neglected many things and lost many things. He just had not noticed it before. God said, "Red Lucia, the chasm of desire will not be satisfied just because you give enough. The mountain of resentment, the mountain, will not disappear just because you bestow kindness." After carving this sentence, he could no longer hold back. Tears streamed down his face as he covered it with his hands. "Oh, God, did you already know at that time? What a pity, I did not heed your guidance." In fact, he had vaguely understood God's meaning at the time but was unwilling to believe it. Perhaps God also knew, which was why he sighed and spoke such a sentence. After a long while, he recovered from his sorrow. His face was devoid of any expression as he continued engraving the crown of wisdom bit by bit. He did not want to hear what was happening in the outside world anymore, nor did he want to deal with anything else. He only wanted to complete the covenant between himself and God. Many days later, Red Lucia finally emerged from the secret chamber. The person beside him handed him the scepter and informed him that the funeral arrangements had been made. However, Red Lucia said, "Wait a little longer." He raised the crown of wisdom high, his voice traversing the ocean. "Yesiel, have you found the place of origin? If you have, come back." 24. Yesiel had never ventured so far from the God-given city, nor had he ever seen the ocean so vast, so boundless that he felt the sea should have no end. The so-called land was just a myth. Or rather, it was a place that mortals could never reach, a realm that belonged only to the divine. They passed through whirlpools that could tear islands asunder. In their sight, the whirlpools connected the sky and the sea, and terrifying thunderbolts reached from the cloud layers down to the depths of the ocean. Ah, these were the agonized screams of Yesiel and his companions as they were dragged forward by their tentacles. Woo woo woo, these were the sounds made by the fusion monster Nini. They fled in terror, but the destructive thunderbolts and storms seemed to have eyes, relentlessly pursuing them. Only when they were utterly exhausted did they finally escape from the whirlpools, grasp. After their narrow escape, Yesiel and his companions laughed heartily. The feeling of struggling against the storms and emerging alive filled them with an indescribable sense of exhilaration. As their laughter subsided, they realized they had lost their way. They had to circle around for a long time before finally regaining their bearings and setting off in the direction the King of Wisdom had indicated. They then encountered a strange sea that suddenly boiled all life to a pulp. As bubbles rose from the seawater, large swaths of dead creatures floated to the surface. If the fusion monster Nini had not enveloped them, they would have perished there long ago. They faced all sorts of unforeseen dangers and witnessed the vastness of the world. Amidst the perils, they unleashed boundless strength. On this day, as they rested, they chatted idly once more. A follower asked Yesiel, "Prince Yesiel, when will we reach the place of origin?" Yesiel replied, "We will be there soon." The follower asked, "How soon is soon?" Yesiel said, "Soon means I don't know how long it will take either." In the night sea, all the trilobite men currently resting against the reefs looked at Yesiel, their eyes filled with astonishment. Quote? Yesiel laughed heartily, "Although I don't know when we'll arrive, I know we're close. We are following in the footsteps of God and the King of Wisdom from long ago, moving against the current. The path we have traversed is the sea route God used to guide the King of Wisdom to the God-given land. Since the direction is not wrong and the landmarks are not wrong, as long as we keep going, we will definitely find the place of origin." Everyone looked at the confident Yesiel, and their moods also lightened, laughing along with him. Another young man stood up. "Prince Yesiel, will our story truly be recorded in the epic?" "Yes, yes. How do you know about things so many years from now, Prince?" Yesiel nodded, saying with absolute certainty, "Of course I know." The crowd was amazed. "Is it a prophecy?" Someone also asked, "Or did the supreme god Yinsai tell you, Prince?" Yesiel shook his head and looked at the others with a mysterious smile. "After we return, I will find someone to carve down our story. 10,000 years later, our story will not only be an epic but also a myth." So that was how epics and myths came to be. The crowd couldn't help but laugh out loud again. During the conversation, the originally tense and oppressive atmosphere instantly dispersed. The next day, everyone continued their journey. It was a sunny day with not a cloud in sight for 10,000 miles. The fusion monster Nini seemed to have discovered something and swam faster. Along the way, it kept letting out roaring sounds. It sensed the lingering presence of Shelly, the mother of life, in this place. "Quick, look, what is that?" someone shouted. More people emerged from the depths of the sea and looked towards the other side of the ocean. They saw a line dividing the sky and the sea. That line also blocked off the ocean, drawing an end to the boundless world of water. "It's land, it's land, we finally found it. Prince Yesiel, do you see it?" Of course, Yesiel saw it. At this moment, he was also plunged into an indescribable ecstasy. At the end of the ocean was land. Yesiel finally understood the meaning of this phrase and his father's reluctance to let go. The ocean had its unique tranquility and vastness, while the land possessed the same profundity and endlessness. He led a group of trilobite men and the fusion monster Nini to set foot on the horizon, slowly ascending. "The place of origin, I found you." Yesiel knelt on the sandy soil, scooping up sand and burying his face in it. After enduring countless hardships, he had finally found this place where God had descended, the birthplace of the King of Wisdom, the progenitor of the trilobite men. The land where God descended. A trilobite man beside Yesiel asked, "Prince Yesiel, are we really going to establish a city here?" Yesiel replied, "Establish a city." Yesiel shook his head and then loudly declared to this land, "No, we will establish 10 cities, 100 cities here. I want the footprints of the Yinsai kingdom to cover every corner of this place." Yesiel looked towards the coastline. The closer to the shore, the more abundant the plants and creatures, and the more suitable for the trilobite men to inhabit. His joy could not be concealed, he was on the verge of dancing. Look at this coastline. It can sustain so many ancestral fish. This is the most suitable home for us to dwell in. The group set up camp here. Yesiel even had his companion, the fusion monster Nini, dig out some buildings embedded in the cliffs to provide them with temporary residence and to prepare for the continuous arrival of trilobite men in the future. Just as they had laid the foundation here and were about to begin a new era for the Yinsai kingdom. In the mind of the excited Yesiel, his father's voice suddenly emerged. Unlike the excited and thrilled Yesiel, one could sense the sorrow in that voice. Yesiel, have you found the place of origin? If you have, come back. Yesiel immediately turned his head and gazed towards the ocean. Although his father did not say it, he felt that something had happened, and it was certainly not good. Yesiel had his followers stay behind to open up the new city while he himself rode the fusion monster Nini back to the God-given city at the fastest speed. However, as soon as he returned, he felt that something was amiss. Prince Yesiel, Prince Yesiel, Prince. All the subjects of the God-given city on both sides of the main road were bowing to Yesiel, but their eyes were filled with sorrow. The entire God-given city seemed to be shrouded in a dark cloud. He hurried towards the Wisdom Palace, only to find that the once magnificent Wisdom Palace had long collapsed into ruins, with only the stone fortress behind and part of the Bedchamber Palace on the left remaining. The guards at the entrance knelt on one knee and said to Yesiel, Prince Yesiel, our condolences. Yesiel ran directly through the corridor and rushed in, only to see a stone coffin placed in the side hall. And his mother, the queen of the Yinsai kingdom, now lay quietly in the stone coffin. He instantly knelt down, staring at the stone coffin in disbelief. Mother Queen, Red Lucia emerged from the shadowy doorway. Yesiel, my son. I have been waiting for you all this time. Yesiel knelt and looked at his father, not understanding why such changes had occurred in the short time he was away. King, what exactly happened? 25. Yesiel never thought that one departure would be a farewell. He had fulfilled his former dreams, conquering the ocean and setting foot on the continent and the place of origin, but he didn't even get to see his mother for the last time before her death. Together with his father, he watched as the queen's stone coffin was buried in the cemetery. From here, one could see the ocean. It was also the oldest district of the God-given city. Back then, Red Lucia and his queen had established this place together. Every brick and tile here bore their traces, but most of the old people and companions from those days had already passed away. Only at this moment did Yesiel ask his father, still finding it hard to believe. King of Wisdom, was it really Ensign Boone? Red Lucia neither confirmed nor denied it. He only said to his son, on the path to becoming king, it's not just about gaining, but more about losing. Red Lucia turned around and left the cemetery. Follow me, Yesiel asked, where are we going? Red Lucia looked at the pyramid at the end of the avenue, a smile appearing on his face, along with a sense of relief. To see God. Yesiel's body stiffened. He had already sensed what was about to happen. His father, walking ahead, could feel his son's emotions without turning around. Don't be afraid, Yesiel. You will do even better. You will surpass me and become an even greater king. On the main avenue of the God-given city, paved with stones, all the subjects spontaneously emerged from their houses and stood on both sides of the road. They watched as Red Lucia led his son, escorted by guards, towards the pyramid. As Red Lucia and Yesiel passed before them, the people on both sides immediately knelt on one knee, lowering their heads and placing their hands on their chests. The two of them seemed to be walking along a path of blessings and adoration. Everyone knew that when the old king and the new king changed places, they worshipped the old king while grieving the aging and passing of the monarch. At the same time, they blessed the wise and just new king. Red Lucia led his son up the stairs, with a group of people carrying two stone coffins towards the god's temple. The former had come before God to inherit the authority of the King of Wisdom, while the latter were sinners who had disturbed and blasphemed against God, along with their offspring. The stone coffins contained Red Lucia's two sons, Ence and Boone. Ence was the mastermind, but Boone had also agreed to Ence's plan. All of this was laid bare before the King of Wisdom and God. The old and new kings entered the god's temple, while the sinners knelt outside. Inside the god's temple, Yin Shen was waiting for Red Lucia. He was looking at the images Red Lucia had carved for him. Everything seemed to have happened just yesterday. The newly born Red Lucia was carving statues in the temple, imitating Yin Shen's tone and learning the divine words. His intonation was strange, both comical and exaggerated. How quickly time passes. Yin Shen mused, a hint of nostalgia in his voice. It feels like only yesterday. Red Lucia looked at God's back. The flowing light seemed to brush past his face like the hem of God's robe. The tall shadow, from his kneeling angle, appeared so lofty. Just like the first time he had seen God, without the slightest change. I thought I would stand proudly before you, handing in a satisfactory answer sheet at the last moment of my life. I didn't expect that in the end, I would let you, God, see my most embarrassing and powerless moment, witnessing the ugly farce of patricide. Yin Shen looked at him. His aged and stooped figure, his sandy, stone-like exoskeleton, all indicated that he had reached the end of his life. Only his eyes remained as devout as in the past. He extended his hand, Red Lucia. What else do you want? He even glanced at Shelley, who stood like a doll in front of the pillar. Although the powers of the two bloodlines conflicted with each other, Shelley's unique life power and immortality might be able to prolong Red Lucia's life. As long as Red Lucia begged him, Yin Shen was willing to give it to him. Red Lucia seemed to understand Yin Shen's meaning. He shook his head. Oh, God, he whispered, his voice heavy with emotion. The time has come for us to let go. I should let go, and you should let go too. It's because I couldn't bear to let go that I caused today's bitter fruit, ultimately killing my eldest son Ence with my own hands. I am also your eldest son. I have received enough favor. Yin Shen lowered his hand and said nothing more. It's your decision. A childlike smile appeared on Red Lucia's face. God still favored him as in the past, even though he had gone against God's will, even though his thoughts and will were utterly ridiculous. Yes, my son, Red Lucia called out, his voice filled with tender affection. Come to me. He looked at his son and pulled him to the same position as himself, kneeling side by side at the foot of the altar. Yesiel knelt at the feet of God, but he was looking at his father. King. But Red Lucia said, Here, I am no longer your king. Yesiel's voice instantly became choked with tears, which kept sliding down from the corners of his eyes. Father. Red Lucia smiled with satisfaction. He raised his hands to grasp the crown on his head, lifting it up bit by bit. Then, he placed it on Yesiel's head. From now on, you are the king, the second king of wisdom of the Yinsai kingdom. Yesiel sobbed uncontrollably, his shoulders trembling incessantly. He was Red Lucia's youngest son, a prince who had grown up with expectations and favoritism. His father's attention and preference were like a mountain that shielded him from the wind and rain, giving him the courage and strength to realize all his dreams, making him fearless of any difficulties. But now, that mountain, his pillar of strength, was crumbling before his very eyes. No, father, Yesiel pleaded, his voice barely a whisper. Please, you are the king. You will always be the king of the Trilobite men, the king of the Yinsai kingdom. The eternal king of wisdom. Red Lucia laughed, his eyes slowly closing at the same time. Only gods are eternal. No matter how much we gain, Red Lucia spoke, his voice trembling with emotion, we all must face the inevitable decay and loss. As those final words left his lips, Red Lucia's eyes drifted shut. And they would never open again. The last will and power in Red Lucia's body surged out, transforming into a phantom phosphorescent outline, finally merging into the crown of wisdom. The black crown connected with Yesiel's exoskeleton, linking with his bloodline. Yesiel could feel that at this moment, the wills and consciousnesses of all Trilobite men emerged in his mind. His consciousness was like a river of stars, and each star in the river was the consciousness of a Trilobite man. He was the monarch standing above the river of stars, able to command the rotation of this river. He inherited the power of the King of Wisdom from the most ancient king, Red Lucia, along with his father's will and ideals. Red Lucia, the once great king who had now lost everything, began to petrify. His body hardened and grew still, transforming into a stone statue eternally kneeling before the presence of God. Just as he had promised. He would guard God here forever. Until the day the sun burned out, until the end of time. 26. Red Lucia was dead. Yin Shen gazed at the ocean outside the great hall, lost in memories. So many things had happened. So much time had passed. Yin, Shen, Yin, Sai, God. In a daze, he seemed to hear Red Lucia's clumsy and comical tone, shouting his name in front of the temple's grand entrance. Outside the god's temple, the sinners who had committed patricide and blasphemed against God also heard Red Lucia's final words, declaring that Yesiel would be the second-generation king of wisdom of the Yinsai kingdom. The moment Yesiel donned the crown of wisdom, all the Trilobite men knew what had transpired within the god's temple. The old king had passed, and the new king was crowned. The sinners outside the temple instantly burst into tears, some even collapsing outside in a disgraceful manner. They wept for the passing of the King of Wisdom, but even more so for their own unknown fate that was about to befall them. Yin Shen cast his gaze upon them, looking at the trilobite men of all sizes surrounding the two stone coffins, and spoke calmly. So noisy. Shut up. As he spoke, a force directly acted upon the bodies of these trilobite men, affecting their bloodline originating from the first trilobite man. The crying abruptly ceased, and they could no longer make a single sound. They even discovered with trepidation that their bodies were undergoing changes. Their vocal organs completely disappeared, their hard shells began to soften, and two antenna-like protrusions grew from their heads. Compared to humans, they resembled insects or soft-shelled shrimp. They could only keep kowtowing towards the god's temple, begging for the divine being's forgiveness. When everything settled, they had evidently transformed into a species somewhat different from ordinary trilobite men, one more suited for survival in the depths of the ocean rather than on land. They had been punished by God, stripped of their right to speak. In the future, they would no longer be able to set foot on land and could only dwell in the deep sea. Yin Shen looked at Red Lucia and said to Yesiel, the second-generation King of Wisdom. Go, leave this place. Take all the people of the God-given city and establish your kingdom on the continent. Don't come back. That voice, like Red Lucia's authority as the King of Wisdom, was directly imprinted in the minds of all trilobite men. The voice even directly erased the memory of the God-given city's location from the minds of all trilobite men, making them suddenly unable to recall the name of the God-given city. Once they left this place, they would never find their way back. With Red Lucia's passing, Yin Shen had completely lost interest in the game of establishing this kingdom and no longer wished to pay attention to it. Yesiel looked at the divine being in panic, not understanding what was happening. Great God Yinsai, why is this? Have we done something wrong? Yin Shen descended from the altar and gazed upon everything Red Lucia had created for him. His voice echoed in the hall. Hollow and indifferent, no longer holding the tolerance he had shown towards Red Lucia. Yesiel, everything I bestowed upon you was because you were Red Lucia's descendants, not because of yourselves. The divine being paused for a moment, he was my firstborn. You are not. This is the God-given land I granted to Red Lucia, a paradise for him and me, not for you. Yesiel crawled forward on his knees, prostrating himself before Yin Shen. He spoke in an urgent tone, even crying out and pleading for God not to do this. God, do you no longer need us? We are your devout believers, the first life you created. Yin Shen let out a light laugh. Even without a god, you can still survive. Everything will remain the same as before, just don't come and disturb me again. I don't need your offerings, much less your faith. With a voice that resonated like the pealing of bells, the lofty divine being spoke words that would forever echo in Yesiel's mind. Believing in me is your business. It has nothing to do with me. Yesiel descended from the pyramid in a daze, and his father's words from not long ago suddenly echoed in his ears. On the path to becoming king, it's not just about gaining. It's more about losing. The covenant between God and the King of Wisdom existed only between God and Red Lucia, and it ended with Red Lucia's passing. God's favoritism existed only for Red Lucia, the first-generation King of Wisdom. He alone was God's firstborn, not the other trilobite men. Yesiel gathered all the subjects of the God-given city and announced his decision to lead everyone away. I am your new king. Yesiel, the King of Wisdom of the Yinsai Kingdom. I have inherited my father's authority and ideals as the King of Wisdom, and I am the successor of his will. We will head to the land and establish a new God-given city. We will follow in the footsteps of the King of Wisdom and God, creating our future in that equally great place of origin on the other side of the sea. As soon as Yesiel finished speaking, all the trilobite men below knelt on the ground in despair, and thousands upon thousands of people wept as one. They felt as if the sky had collapsed upon them. They had just lost their king and were now abandoned by God. Yesiel stepped down from the high platform and walked into the crowd. He helped one person after another to their feet, saying to them as they looked at him with trusting eyes, God has not forsaken us. We still have the place of origin, that land God promised us, which is even vaster. There are boundless lands and expansive coasts suitable for raising ancestral fish. The authority of the King of Wisdom, the ancestral fish, the writing, and the language that God bestowed upon us are still with us. The day will come when we will receive God's forgiveness and return to this promised land once more. Now, let us go to the other side of the sea and create an even more glorious future. By the seaside, tens of thousands of trilobite men left their homeland and entered the ocean, accompanied by dense schools of ancestral fish controlled by the power of wisdom. They would first reach Yesile City and then set out from that underwater city. Next, they would head to the legendary place of origin, another land God had promised them. What no one noticed was that a small portion of the Trilobite men had been exiled to the deep sea. They were the descendants of Ents and Boon. These people were called the God-forsaken people. They could no longer speak and were forever forbidden from using the divine words. Tentacles grew from their heads, and they communicated through tentacle touches. In the deep sea, they gave rise to another branch of the Trilobite men. Open double angle bracket The Hymn of Redlichia, the King of Wisdom close double angle bracket, open double angle bracket Final chapter close double angle bracket. The first generation King of Wisdom, due to his son's betrayal and the death of his queen, ended his glorious and illustrious life before God. He passed the throne to his most outstanding son, Yesile, along with his vows and covenants with God. But the divine being was enraged by Redlichia's death and disappointed by the Trilobite men's sins of patricide and fratricide. God withdrew his promised land, and all the Trilobite men were driven out of the God-given land. The divine being erased the location and memory of the God-given land from their minds, making it impossible for them to ever return to that paradise God had promised. Even if they reached the outer reaches of the God-given land, they could only forever wander upon the great ocean, unable to set foot on this divine island. 27. Yin Shen stood on high, watching the crowd leave the God-given city, with fusion monsters clearing the path ahead. The Trilobite men returned to the sea once more. Several holders of the wisdom powers controlled the fusion monsters, herding dense schools of fish as they followed the setting sun, leaving this paradise that belonged to him, Redlichia, and Shelley. The entire world fell silent, and the once bustling city became empty and desolate. Yin Shen turned around and saw Redlichia kneeling before his divine statue. Redlichia, it's better to leave this place. We don't need so many people to accompany us. The sea and land are the destiny of civilization. This is just an island. He wanted to pat Redlichia's shoulder as he had done before, but his hand passed right through Redlichia's body. This startled Yin Shen, and he was dazed for a moment before realizing the reason. Redlichia's mythical blood had been entirely divided among his descendants and the crown of wisdom. This body was now just an ordinary shell, no longer possessing the power Yin Shen had bestowed upon Redlichia, and it had lost the ability to anchor. Yin Shen looked at his radiant hand, and a strong, nameless anger suddenly surged in his heart. Am I dead or alive? Yin Shen wanted to smash everything in front of him, but he raised his hand and put it down again. Anger and impatience were futile. The only thing he could rely on was endless time and life. He could change everything and accomplish anything. All he needed was to wait. From fearing loneliness to loathing loneliness. Now, he was starting to get used to loneliness. God, no companions. He sat on the steps of the temple, looking at the quiet God-given land. He watched the sun's shadows slowly spread over the buildings of the God-given city, watched the moon move from one side of the night sea to the other. Several cycles of the sun rising and setting passed before he finally stood up. Shelley. The girl turned her head to look at him, her big eyes staring at him. She ran over to Yin Shen and stretched out her head, making a sound. Gurgle gurgle. Yin Shen headed down the steps. Let's go for a walk. The two walked down from the temple together, with Shelley holding a flower pot. Yin Shen stood for a while in front of the statue Yesile had built for Redlichia, then took a turn around the deathly silent God-given city and came to the marsh where the ancestral fish were once raised. Finally, he stopped at the shoreline. The tides eroded the beach, leaving rocks and gravel everywhere. Shelley planted her beloved sun cup flower not far from the beach. After being freed from the stone pot that bound it, this bizarre life, half plant and half animal, began to release its powerful vitality, its root system spreading underground like tentacles. In just a few days, it grew to over a meter tall. Soon after, several more seedlings sprouted beside it. Reproducing, spreading, sun cup flowers bloomed all over the God-given land, covering the beaches and coasts, climbing the hills and valleys. Eventually, they slowly crept into the deathly silent God-given city, restoring the vibrant colors of life to this empty city. The entire God-given land transformed into a sea of golden flowers. And the tall golden pyramid temple stood at the very center of this floral sea. In this era, this place was a true paradise and a dreamland. Looking at the shimmering golden sea of flowers, with the wind blowing through the swaying gold, it was a bit dazzling and made one feel dazed. Yin Shen felt much more at ease. Truly beautiful. Shelley didn't seem to know whether she liked it or not, but she always quietly walked down and submerged herself in that golden sea of flowers. Inhaling the fragrant aroma, she comfortably lay down to bask in the sun. Finally, one day, Yin Shen called Shelley back from where she was hiding in the sea of flowers. He was preparing to temporarily slow down his perception of time and fall into a deep slumber. For him, this was also a means of traversing time. Waking up after a long sleep, whether it be hundreds or even tens of thousands of years later, wasn't it like crossing the river of time? Shelley, I'm going to sleep for a while. Stay in the temple and don't wander around. Don't leave the God-given land. Wait for me to wake up. Yin Shen entered the divine statue, and the light gradually receded into the statue, no longer showing any abnormalities. He waited for the power of mythical blood to undergo a qualitative change, or for some kind of transformation in supernatural powers and abilities. Perhaps at some point, he could change this situation. In the dark temple, Shelley nestled beside the divine statue, swinging her little legs. Her hollow gaze looked into the distance as she made her unique sound. Gurgle gurgle, dash. The land. Having succeeded in reaching it the first time, the trilobite men avoided all the dangerous places and successfully arrived at the place of origin on their second attempt. This route was called the Yesile route, commemorating Yesile and his companions' great achievements in finding the place of origin. Yesile, the second-generation king of wisdom, led tens of thousands of people onto the land. Everyone was stunned by the vastness of this land, which was beyond their imagination. The place of origin. Is this where God descended? Does all of this belong to us? They knelt on the coast, kissing the earth and chanting the names of God and Redlichia, the first-generation king of wisdom. They still believed in God, even more fervently than before. Even though they had been expelled from the God-given land, it was because the trilobite men had committed unforgivable sins. It was they who had done wrong, not the divine being. Because they had witnessed with their own eyes the boundless greatness of the divine being and seen the terrible judgment that befell the sinners who had blasphemed against God. And now, seeing this boundless land, they suddenly felt that they had not been exiled by God, but that the divine being had bestowed upon them an even vaster God-given land. This was a place that could accommodate them and their future generations to live and survive forever. The vast coastal waters had a warm climate and an abundance of underwater plants and creatures, making it the most suitable place to raise the ancestral fish bestowed upon them by the divine being. Just as Yesile had said, this was the most suitable place for their survival. Here, there was hope and a future. Yesile stood on the cliff by the coast and stretched out his hand to all the trilobite men who had landed on the place of origin below. I told you, God has not forsaken us. The people cheered and rejoiced. Some were moved to tears, while others buried their heads deep in the sand, as if to feel the breath of God that remained here. It seemed that by doing so, they could receive God's blessings just like in the God-given city. 3 huge fusion monsters were excavating boulders to build the main structure of the new city, while other trilobite men assisted on the side and opened up their fishing grounds along the coast. After the deaths of Ence and Boone, their fusion monsters also belonged to the new king, Yesile. Seeing the bustling place of origin and the city that was taking shape, Yesile's eyes showed joy. Yesile's follower asked him, King, what should this city be called? Yesile, wearing the crown of wisdom, fell into deep thought. This is the place where the divine being descended and the birthplace of the great first-generation king of wisdom. It is the place of origin for his trilobite men. But everything happened because of the divine being's descent, which led to everything that followed. Let's call it the God-descended city. It differed from the God-given city by only one character. This way, it was as if nothing had changed at all. 28. Several decades later, the God-descended city had an artificial lake connected to the sea, where an underwater city and the breeding grounds for the trilobite men's offspring were located. It was somewhat similar to the divine well in the former God-given city, but much larger. In the lake were several giant, bizarre shrimp. These ocean overlords were harnessed with ropes made from tan seaweed from the sea, and a few tall, strong trilobite men holding bone spears rode them, fighting fiercely in the lake. Rise up, charge. As they chanted slogans, the oceanic behemoths beneath them seemed to become an extension of their bodies, moving according to their will. As the bone spears struck, the 2 giant claws in front of the bizarre shrimp's mouth clashed together, causing the blood of all the trilobite men watching this fierce battle to boil, cheering and roaring. In front of the lake, a figure wearing a crown sat on a luxurious, high-backed, carved throne, surrounded by a crowd, watching these young trilobite men fight and struggle. These people were mostly Yesile's juniors and holders of the wisdom powers. Over the decades, quite a few had gained the wisdom powers, with a few awakening through bloodline and most receiving the power bestowment from the royal family. The aging trilobite men of the royal family bestowed their powers upon their descendants. Naturally, these people were not as fortunate as the second-generation royal bloodline, able to receive the divine being's blessing and directly possess mythical creatures like fusion monsters. The older generation had not fully passed away, and it was uncertain when they would inherit the fusion monsters, let alone if it would even fall to them. So, some took a different path, taming and controlling bizarre shrimp in the sea or some other creatures. This allowed them to master some special abilities and possess powerful combat strength or other supporting capabilities. As the performance ended, these strong and tall trilobite men of the royal family walked up the lakeshore and knelt before the throne. You are quite impressive, brave and fearless, able to skillfully use the wisdom powers. Worthy of inheriting the bloodline of the most ancient king and deserving of the royal status. Yesiel, the second-generation king of wisdom, stood up and pointed his scepter at them. He called out their names one by one. With my identity as the king of wisdom, I bestow upon you the title of priest of God. From now on, these few young descendants of the royal family truly became priests. They were also the most powerful group standing at the top of the Yinsai kingdom, second only to the king. Great king, we will forever follow the faith of the divine being and obey your rule. Yesiel was pleased. The emergence of outstanding individuals among the younger generation made him feel that his Yinsai kingdom was becoming increasingly prosperous and developed. He mused to himself, if these juniors were dispatched to other places, they would surely establish several more cities and expand the territory of the Yinsai kingdom. In the city, wide waterways crisscrossed like rivers, which were similar to roads for the trilobite men. Yesiel rode his fusion monster, Nini, and led his guards from the waterways towards the royal palace. Along the way, everyone who saw him knelt and paid their respects. From high up, one could see dense crowds and markets on the main streets. On the streets, people sold pickled dried fish, sun-dried fish meat, fresh ancestral fish, and other foods caught from the sea. There were also various bone utensils, bone plates, bone bowls, bone knives, and bone spears everywhere. While these utensils were crafted from the bones of deceased trilobite men, the Yinsai kingdom seemed to have few taboos surrounding this practice. Only the remains of those with noble bloodlines were granted the honor of burial. The god-descended city was different from the god-given city. The most obvious difference was the high stone walls built on the outskirts of the city. The city walls divided the interior and exterior into two levels. Firstly, those living within the city were basically nobles and their servants. Secondly, those entering the god-descended city had to pay taxes. This was a law established by Yesiel, the second-generation king of wisdom, after he issued the legal code and currency of the Yinsai kingdom. Outside the city, there were villages of various sizes, where large numbers of merchants working for the nobles, laboring artisans, and fish farmers gathered. Along this coastline, magnificent cities were built one after another. Currently, the Yinsai kingdom had 17 cities. Social relations became more complex, not only with a stratified rights system but also with various occupations. Together with the villages of all sizes, the population of the Yinsai kingdom had reached hundreds of thousands. This was something unimaginable during the time of Redlichia, the first-generation king of wisdom. In this regard, Yesiel had surpassed his father. Yesiel returned to the palace, where several noble officials of the Yinsai kingdom were already waiting for him at the entrance. King, the legal code has been revised and erected on the south side of the royal palace. Eager to see the revised legal code, Yesiel hastened his return to the palace. Yesiel immediately jumped down from his fusion monster, Nini, and excitedly followed the group to the south, with a large crowd closely following behind. The legal code was one of his most important achievements in life. This was already the 7th revision, and he felt it should be the final one. In his view, it was a flawless legal code. The legal code was engraved on a stone tablet outside the royal palace, inscribed with the divine script compiled by Redlichia. Yesiel stood before this stone tablet, touching the words created by his father and God, his eyes radiating with pride. Father, I did not disappoint you. From returning from outside to sitting on the throne, he felt as if he was floating on clouds. Yesiel was immersed in his own glory. He had built over a dozen cities, created the legal code, and expanded the Yinsai kingdom. He had accomplished what his father had not been able to do. He had established a great kingdom and became a praised king. Redlichia had placed his divine script stone tablets in his wisdom palace, while Yesiel placed his compiled legal code, with the walls carved with Yesiel's past adventure epics. He was very happy today, excited beyond measure. He stood up from the throne from time to time, circling around the palace, looking at these past deeds of his. Without warning, a messenger rushed into the throne room. "King, the Grand Princess wishes to see you." Yesiel's expression changed. Yesiel rushed to another city and entered a building similar to the former bedchamber palace in the God-given city. Inside, an elderly female trilobite man was waiting for him. Yesiel breathed a sigh of relief, and his originally hurried pace slowed down. "Sister," he said, puzzled by her sudden summons. "What prompted you to call for me so unexpectedly?" Yesiel saw his sister, whose appearance closely resembled his mother's. In the past, she had taken him to catch fish in the marshes and on adventures deep into the sea. It was she who had made his childhood so perfect and had given him the seed of courage and the courage to take risks. For Yesiel, she was not only his sister but also an elder like a mother. The Grand Princess looked somewhat melancholic, her eyes constantly gazing towards the other side of the sea. "Sister," he asked, his concern evident, "what troubles you so?" The Grand Princess turned her head to look at Yesiel, her eyes showing the same gentleness as the former queen. "King," she began, her voice soft but heavy with emotion, "do you believe we shall ever return to the God-given land? Will we gaze upon the faces of our Father and God once more?" "Without question," Yesiel declared, his conviction unwavering. "I remain the King of Wisdom, and the crown of wisdom rests upon my brow. The covenant between God and the trilobite men has not ended because of this. As long as we atone for our sins, we will naturally be able to return to the God-given land." Yesiel did not notice that his tone and demeanor when speaking had become very similar to Redlichia's. The Grand Princess's eyes shone with radiance as she smiled at her brother. "That's good, that's good." The elderly Grand Princess let out a long sigh of relief, as if she had been relieved of a burden. "If one day, King, you can return to the God-given land, take my bones with you and bury me next to Mother. I miss her." Yesiel hugged his sister. "Don't be in a hurry. It's still early. When the time comes, we will return together to see Mother and Father." Yesiel had just returned to the God-descended city when news arrived a few days later. The Grand Princess had passed away. When Yesiel received the news, he stood up abruptly and then sat down in a daze. He recalled his sister's words again and was startled to discover the fear and confusion in his own heart. No matter how much glory he obtained or how great his achievements were, it could not withstand the inner unease and perplexity, let alone dispel the trilobite men's yearning to return to the God-given land. Moreover, they feared being forsaken by God and regretted their exile from his paradise. Their will and spirit had lost their resting place. They were like a group of wandering souls drifting at the ends of the earth. Deep in his heart, Yesiel was the same as the other trilobite men, still unable to forget returning to the God-given land. In their eyes, that was their final resting place. 29. Along the Yesiel route, numerous underwater villages were connected to the largest underwater city, Yesiel City. Although more trilobite men had grown accustomed to living on land, some still preferred to dwell beneath the sea. This route also served as a trade route, with merchants from the Yinsai Kingdom constantly traveling along it. Several sea monsters of various forms cleared the way. Atop the spine of a giant starfish-like creature stood a palace made of bone, where the King of Wisdom currently sat. Hundreds of Yinsai Kingdom's royal guards stood on either side, among them several priests riding bizarre shrimp. As they journeyed, the most abundant creatures beneath the sea were trilobites, followed by the shadows of some ancestral fish. As the trilobite men domesticated schools of fish, this species also began to scatter throughout the ocean. "The King of Wisdom has come. Our Supreme King of the Yinsai Kingdom has arrived. Quick, look, those are the mythical beasts bestowed by the god." The trilobite men in the Yinsai Kingdom's villages along the way celebrated the arrival of Yesiel, the King of Wisdom. They gazed at the fusion monsters, as large as small mountains, with astonishment and reverence. Many even followed behind him from afar, seeing him off until he disappeared into the distance. Without the presence of the god, Yesiel had become a divine figure in their eyes. Finally, they reached Yesiel City, where thousands of trilobite men emerged from the seabed and surfaced to welcome their king. The Lord of Yesiel City surfaced, stepped onto the back of the fusion monster, and knelt before the palace. "Great King of Wisdom, your subjects welcome your arrival," the Lord said respectfully. Yesiel also stepped out, looking at this sea area with a tinge of emotion. "It's been a long time since I returned." Led by the Lord, the massive fusion monster submerged into the seabed. Beneath the translucent blue ocean, bubbles continuously rose to the surface. Under the refraction of sunlight, a magnificent and majestic underwater city lay at the bottom of the sea. Large numbers of trilobite men resided here, entering and exiting the submerged buildings. Some drove schools of fish towards the underwater vegetation formed by ancient cup creatures, while others patrolled the waters above the city with bone spears. Entering Yesile's former temporary palace, the Lord immediately asked cautiously, "King of Wisdom, may I ask the reason for your return this time?" Yesile did not answer directly but first inquired, "In these years, has anyone entered the God-given land again, or rather, has anyone seen the God-given land?" The Lord of Yesile City was slightly stunned. There has been no news of the God-given land for decades. If you hadn't mentioned it, King, I would have nearly forgotten that the God-given land also exists in these waters. I can't even remember in which direction it lies. It should be in. He tried his best to recall, but it seemed as if something in his mind suppressed his memory of the God-given land's location, making it impossible for him to remember. After speaking, he immediately realized. King, you couldn't possibly be wanting to return to. The Lord of Yesile City became agitated. Yesile, the second-generation King of Wisdom, gazed into the depths of the ocean, his eyes gradually overlapping with those of Redlichia from the past. The same devotion, the same composure. I wish to see the God-given land once more, not seeking to bathe in God's glory again, but only seeking a hint of guidance, Yesile said solemnly. I want God to guide me, to show the future of the trilobite men. How can we, the descendants of Redlichia, atone for our sins? On the boundless sea, a group of trilobite men and several fusion monsters scoured the waters, searching this sea area in a net-like fashion. They wandered like blind sea worms for over half a month but to no avail. They searched every corner, from the surface to the seabed, yet could not find the slightest trace. A mighty force seemed to prevent them from approaching the legendary God-given land, no matter how much effort and thought they put into it. It should be right here, clearly right here, an elderly trilobite man noble muttered in despair. Why can we never find the God-given land? On the palace carried by the fusion monster, the noble broke down. This is divine punishment. God has made it so we may never be able to return to the promised paradise. The trilobite man rushed out, facing the endless ocean. He knelt on the head of the fusion monster, weeping bitterly. He was one of the noblest trilobite men in the former God-given city. Unlike the younger generation who only had a longing and admiration for the God-given land, he had personally witnessed the calamity that erupted between the first-generation King of Wisdom and the blasphemer Ents. He had experienced the shock of the first-generation King of Wisdom's death and the sorrow of being exiled from the God-given land by God. He was born under God's protection, growing up gazing at God's palace. He had grown up listening to the great first-generation King of Wisdom, Redlichia, proclaim that they were the firstborn of God. He had once wailed and wept as he watched the God-given city gradually disappear from sight. The older he became, the more he yearned to return under God's protection. He was in utter despair. We may never be able to return to the God-given land, he lamented. His generation could still find this sea area based on vague memories and records. What about a few generations later? Yesile helped up this elder who had once followed his father and said to him, God will forgive us. We, the wandering children, will one day be able to return home. Yesile had thought that even if he couldn't set foot on the God-given land, it would be good to catch a glimpse of it from afar. However, he ultimately returned disappointed. Yet, he still stubbornly had others search for traces of the God-given land on the surface. He harbored a fantasy that perhaps in this way, God would see his devotion and persistence. In the God-given land, golden sun cup flowers had overgrown the ruins of the city, covering the entire island. Shelley was the only being that could move freely in this vast island, and the entire island was her garden. She usually sat on the steps in front of the temple, imitating God as she watched the sunset and the moon, or gazed up at God's statue in the depths of the temple. She could do this for an entire day. Sometimes, she would also stroll through the flower sea in the ruined city, fiddling with the crowns of the sun cups and inhaling the fragrance of the flower sea. These sun cups had shattered the originally neat stone-paved paths. Shelley made her way through the ruins of the city, passing through a flower sea taller than her, and arrived at the seaside. She came to the place where God had once instructed her to plant the first sun cup and picked up the stone flower pot she had previously discarded. Gurgle gurgle, she exclaimed. She plucked a golden flower, wanting to stuff it into the flower pot and hold it in her arms as usual. Being violently uprooted from the ground, this half-plant, half-animal flower immediately let out a screech and bared its sharp fangs. It struggled, and Shelley's hand gripping it abruptly exerted force. Snap! The flower stem broke into two. Gurgle gurgle. Shelley made a sound but paid no heed. She threw the broken sun cup into the sea and then reached her venomous hand towards the next one. The sun cup flower drifted with the ocean currents, gradually disappearing into the distant waters. 30. In the sea area not far from Yesile City, a group of Yinsai Kingdom soldiers patrolled the sea's surface, led by two young priests riding bizarre shrimp. They were among the juniors recently granted the priestly status by Yesile, the King of Wisdom. The young priests, following the King of Wisdom's orders, had already scoured this sea area time and time again. One of them finally couldn't help but ask, is the God-given city really here? We've counted every stone in the sea here. If such a large island truly existed, we should at least find some traces of it. The other priest beside him chuckled, looking at him. Are you questioning the great King of Wisdom? Or are you doubting God's power? The young priest immediately fell silent, not daring to say more. Understood. I will earnestly continue the search. The king's decree is the king's decree. Although the other priest had warned the young priest, he also believed their search to be futile. He sighed and once again recited the story circulating in the Yinsai Kingdom. Everyone knew it, but each time it was told, it felt different. Ents, the blasphemer, killed his own younger brother, Boone, and seized the Ru-Beast fusion monster God had bestowed upon Boone. Ents used the power God granted to the Trilobite men, intending to murder the firstborn of God, his great father. Redlichia, the King of Wisdom. His voice was melodious as if chanting a great epic. Such a grave sin, occurring in the God-permitted paradise of God and the King of Wisdom, at the foot of God's palace. Disappointed and saddened, God brought divine punishment upon the subjects of the Yinsai Kingdom. The descendants of the sinner were forever exiled to the demonic abyss of the deep sea, and the subjects of Yinsai could never return to their former home. Oh, God, when will you forgive our sins and once again cast your glory upon the Yinsai Kingdom? After singing this widely circulated poem in Yinsai, he shook his head. We mortals, without God's forgiveness, how could we ever set foot in God's palace again? Although both priests felt this journey was destined to be fruitless, they still diligently and meticulously carried out the King of Wisdom's decree. They split into two routes and ventured deeper along the sea area. The young priest, leading a squad of soldiers, stirred up the waves. As they swiftly traversed the sea's surface, he spotted a streak of gold in the distance. In the pure azure sea, that brilliant golden hue was remarkably eye-catching. What's that floating on the sea? He wondered. Let's take a look. The group rushed over, and the priest on the bizarre shrimp extended his bone spear, scooping up the golden flower named the Sun Cup from the sea's surface. The crowd had never seen such a thing before. They had never even seen anything golden, except for the sun in the sky. What is this? The same color as the sun. How incredible! The priest caught the scent of the flower's fragrance, and he couldn't help but lean in closer. Then, as if by reflex, he took a deep breath. The pollen of the Sun Cup, along with its unique cells, entered the young priest's body through his breath. No one could have foreseen that this originally unremarkable God-made object, when combined with the young priest's mythical blood, would undergo an earth-shattering change. The mythical blood underwent a qualitative transformation, just as a fusion monster would devour the organs of other lifeforms and graft them onto its own body. The first-generation mythical blood of the Wisdom Path, through the Sun Cup, perfected a portion of its gene fragments, taking a new step forward. Golden fluorescence emanated from the priest's body in waves. The priest unconsciously released the Sun Cup in his hand, letting it float. The wisdom power had granted the priest's eyes that could see through the hearts of others, the ability to read minds and communicate with any life. However, their power had never been able to directly affect any other object. But at this moment, everything changed. His power could leave his body and directly influence the outside world. As the golden fluorescence radiated from his body, the entire squad of soldiers beside him caught a whiff of a fragrance that directly affected the depths of their minds. In shock and horror, as if their consciousness had been seized, they found themselves unable to move. Their forms were fixed in place as they slowly sank beneath the seawater. Fortunately, they were able to survive in seawater, so their lives were not in danger. The young priest of God, at this moment, was completely unaware. His eyes emitted a golden light, and his consciousness suddenly appeared on a golden island. He saw the place where the Sun Cup had once been. He stood on the shore, with a dense golden flower sea swaying beside him. The flower sea extended along the coast, and a magnificent city was buried within the Sun Cups. Where is this? He muttered, looking around in a daze. He didn't understand how he could suddenly appear here when he had just been at sea. How could there suddenly be such an island, filled with a flower sea that resembled a celestial realm? It was breathtakingly beautiful. Until he saw the city without walls and the marsh surrounded by stones, he immediately realized, his pupils instantly dilating to their limit. Although the young trilobite man had never seen it with his own eyes, he had heard of this place countless times. The God-given city. This is the God-given city. He raised his head and gazed towards the center of the island, where he saw the colossal pyramid. Atop the pyramid, amidst the radiant light, a faintly visible temple could be seen. And, the Yinsai Temple. He finally understood why this object possessed the same color as the sun. It was something that had flowed out from the God-given land, the sunflower blooming at the foot of God's palace. On the other side, in Yesile City, the bloodline of the wisdom power had changed, and Yesile, wearing the crown of wisdom, was the first to sense it. Who is it? Who has perfected the wisdom power? He activated the King of Wisdom's power and immediately saw the source that had triggered the change, calling out the name of that young priest. Shlode. It meant oath, a name the royal family was fond of using. Yesile, the King of Wisdom, swiftly rode his fusion monster to this sea area, with the Yinsai Kingdom's guards following closely behind, tightly surrounding the area. Under the gaze of thousands, the priest of God, Shlode, nervously rode his bizarre shrimp and stopped beneath the fusion monster. In front of this mythical lifeform, the massive overlord of the sea was like a tiny shrimp. Shlode came before the king and knelt, presenting the God-made object he had obtained. Great King of Wisdom, Shlode presents to you this God-made object. May God's glory forever shine upon the Yinsai Kingdom. The moment Yesile saw the golden flower, he exclaimed its name. The Sun Cup. He had seen the name of this flower before and learned its name from his father. It was the God-made object Mother of Life, Shelley, held in her arms, possessing a brilliant color akin to the sun in the sky. He had never thought that among the many God-made objects, this seemingly unremarkable thing would have such a connection to the wisdom power. In an instant, he felt as if fate had already been predetermined. It seemed as though God's gaze, from above the river of time, had long foreseen this moment. Oh, God, was all of this arranged by you? In his mind, Yesile recalled the words his father had said to him when he was young, Yesile, do not be afraid. God has arranged everything. His sharp gaze turned to this young priest. Such a thing could only exist in God's palace, it was impossible for it to appear here. Where did this come from? What did you see? Facing Yesile's gaze, Shlode's body trembled. He explained what had just happened to him and everything he had seen. Upon hearing this, Yesile's face showed a joyful and relieved smile, while the elderly trilobite man beside him was so excited that he danced with joy. The God-given land. He saw the God-given land. Yesile raised the sun cup high, as if holding a supreme sacred object. This feeling was one he had only experienced when he faced the crown of wisdom in the past. With tears in his eyes, he laughed and shouted at the top of his lungs. This is God's guidance. God has not abandoned us, He has once again granted us a future. As long as we follow God's guidance, we will surely obtain His forgiveness.